Good morning, everybody. It's
Good morning.
it's the 3rd of July, so this is our 4th of July episode,
This,
basically.
this is it. This is
So,
it.
yeehaw, America.
Well, and for the 4th of July, I'm wearing new glasses.
I mean, those when I saw them this morning, I thought those are patriotic glasses.
I could have gotten the red, white, and blue version, but I decided
Because
not to.
just like patriotism, I mean, they're so white that they're transparent. That's how.
There we go.
I'm wearing red-ish, and then there's blue and white, so I'm like an American flag.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yay me.
So
Yeah, but
all countries matter, Mark. Gus is jumping right on. Yeah, if you want a funny movie to watch, actually for 4th of July, you need to watch the Chris Rock movie. Now I'm forgetting the name. Yeah, where he's president. Crap.
Well, you can look up Chris Rock.
Head of State.
Movie.
Head of State. Yeah, it's Head of State. Great movie, absolutely hilarious. Every time I watch it, it gets more prophetic. So Gus, he's got a thing in there where the Trump-like figure says his campaign slogan is "God bless America and no place else."
That's right.
So, it's kind of
Oof. Well, speaking of America and Trump and make America great again, we're talking about what a fine job our nation's leadership is doing during this pandemic, and
the pandemic,
how it shifts narratives.
It only gets better. So much winning.
Oh gosh. So, I mean, basically, for anyone who hasn't been paying attention, this pandemic has been raging through the South and the West, Southwest, and so we're actually having higher infection rates than ever before. The death rate is lower because this time around, I think it's hitting younger people more, and it's also like we've had a few months heads up, so people aren't dying as quickly, but it's still kind of a shit show, as it were. And so now the Republicans, Trump has been slower on this, but the Republicans have been like, you know what? Masks are great. We should wear them. Because now it's the so-called red states that are being affected. And it's also like undeniable, like, oh, this isn't going away.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a 5-alarm dumpster fire, basically. The scene in places like Arizona, Texas, Florida it's terrifying. I mean, and so far the death rate is lower, but we need to give that a couple weeks to catch up. But
I believe we do it.
But the number of young people who are seriously sick is skyrocketing, right? So in Arizona, 50% of the people in the ICU are between 20 and 44, and the hospitals are so full there that they're actually airlifting people to hospital systems in Los Angeles. So yeah, no, it's so bad. And as of this morning, they're predicting that Texas is going to see 2,000 new hospitalizations a day within 2 weeks. It's not good. Right. And so now the Republicans, who created this mess by declaring that wearing masks was un-American and a breach of their freedoms, suddenly, are like, hey, let's wear masks, right? And Governor Abbott in Texas just is requiring masks everywhere in public. Arizona did that last week. The guy in Florida is still resisting it, but that's not far behind. And Pence is now wearing a mask all over the place. Mitch McConnell is saying, we've got to get rid of the stigma around wearing masks. And it's absolutely fascinating, right?
It's so
And
weird that they have a stigma around wearing them.
I know that's completely nuts.
Like,
But
yeah, that's weird to me.
but anyway, I mean, um, and one of the things that this reveals, again, right, the theme of COVID as the great revealer. One of the things that this reveals is that politics and these political systems are really not about principle.
No.
And we kind of like to think that they're about principle, and people supposedly run on principles and ideas. But the perhaps sad truth is that politics is really about expediency and power.
Who'd have
Um,
thunk?
who'd have thunk?
Yeah,
I bet you didn't know that, Mark.
I
At
didn't know
your
that
young,
until just now.
tender age, just a wee babe.
With my doughy-eyed optimism.
That's right.
But I mean, this is the thing. So it's weird. So I was reading this morning about the responses that are shifting among Republicans, but still, according to Fox News, 68% of Republicans still think that this is an overblown bunch of BS. So it's interesting. So like you have these leaders, they're Republican leadership are advocating for masks, but it's not like their voter base is necessarily up to speed with that either. So this is an interesting political moment where they're like, oh, this is crappy and this is the shift we have to take. Trump hasn't quite, he said masks are great, and I tried one on and it looked pretty good. I mean, that's all he said about it really so far that I found. He's not really advocating.
He said he looks like the Lone Ranger.
Is that what he said?
Still shows, yes.
Which
still shows that he doesn't even know what part of the face the mask goes on.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I mean, he should wear a mask that covers just his entire face. Would be okay with me.
Yeah, that's the Darth Vader approach.
So, but it makes sense. Like, okay, this shift happens. Like, maybe who knows what they were thinking? It's not that big of a deal. Is politically they can mobilize people around. Oh, look again, the liberals are overreacting and trying to take away our freedoms. But now it gets to a point where they have to step in because it's not going away. And so, of course, then there's going to have to be different justification. They can't just say the same narrative we've had all along that, oh, COVID is a big deal and we need to do what we can to protect our people, because that's what the Democrats have been saying. So there has to be a different spin to make it seem like Republican approach.
Yeah, well, now the new spin is masks are going to increase our freedoms, right? So we can be free with a mask. So before it was masks are inhibiting us from being free. And now it's like, oh no, masks are what are going to make us free.
How is that not going to fall into the Democrats were right? Like, how are they going to?
I have no idea. I mean, and this is what's very interesting to me about this. And, before we started, I brought up another great example of this. Which is, what has happened with the whole issue of personal behavior around politicians in the evangelical world, right? So I have a number of friends who grew up in that world, and they grew up with hearing about how horrible Bill Clinton was because of his bad personal behavior. And at that time, the evangelical Republicans were hitting hard on, this guy's horrible because he's an adulterer. He's got bad personal behavior. Somebody has bad personal behavior. You can't trust them in the public realm, and this was just a drumbeat, right, in these people's heads for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. Suddenly Trump comes along and the same exact people completely pivot on a dime. And suddenly it's like, oh no, personal behavior doesn't matter. It's all about policy. We don't care what they do in private. As long as they have the right policies, we're behind them. Then there was the whole, and this is really hilarious to me, Trump is a baby Christian.
Yes.
Right. There was all this stuff about, well, Cyrus wasn't a Christian and he helped, the Jewish people rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And so, Trump is just learning how to behave properly. We see how much he's learned over the last couple of years.
He only accepted Jesus into his heart as his personal Lord and Savior like a couple of weeks ago. So
that's right. Exactly.
Sanctification takes time, Dan.
And so a lot of people were just horribly confused by this. Like, how do you spin this another way? And so I do feel like, yeah, I'm sure there will be a lot of these folks who are totally confused by this change in direction. But I think that what starts to happen is you feel like, okay, well, I guess I have to go along with this because, these are the people I supported. And, but it's a very, very interesting thing that, that politicians whipsaw like this. And with the 24-hour news cycle and the speed of things, what they learn is that, well, you can do it and you just keep spinning really hard. And eventually most of the people go along with you.
Here's a quick question from Steve. Can you provide a source on the Texas hospitalization prediction you cited 2,000 a day for the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's so the CDC provides these modeling updates, and so you can go check them out. It's also being quoted in a number of articles, but both the University of Washington, which has a great epidemiology department, and also the CDC is constantly doing modeling for all these kinds of things: death rates, hospitalizations, cases, and if you keep up to date on that, you can find all that stuff.
So here's how I think, like, if I try to step into my conservative mind that still lives in the back of my head,
still rattling around somewhere in your amygdala.
Here's the things that kind of come up, like, okay, so politicians do things based on expediency, but they manipulate people based on fear. So you have to find a bigger fear. So the thing that makes sense to me is Trump and others start saying, look at where these infections are hitting. Cities and in the Southwest. You know what they have? Immigrants. Like, we were doing fine, but this immigration stuff, they're not law abiding. They're not doing what needs to be done. They're not washing their hands. They're not doing things because they're dirty people, and it's spreading this infection. And so this is like this pandemic, which started as probably, we don't know for sure, but there's some suggestion that it was caused as it's bioterrorism from China, who's our big enemy. So like what we really need to do is like, we need to nip this in the bud. Yeah, let's wear masks, but let's deal with the real issue, which is Chinese and Mexicans. Like that's the narrative I think. Yeah. And then if you're like, in the meantime, if you're Joe or Jane conservative watching this right now, like the way, like, anytime you see a conservative president do things that seem kind of liberal, like making people wear masks, it's, look, those liberals who are really in charge are putting pressure on our guy. And so he's just a man, and he caved. And this shows you that who really has power is these liberal elites that need to be stopped. They act like the conservatives are in power, but we're not in power, because otherwise we'd have things great. These liberals wield too much power, and we need to get them out and give more power to our man so that we can be living mask free. Like, that's the other kind of narrative that gets spun around by conservatives.
Yeah.
And both of those give ample opportunity for people to live in denial.
Yeah, you're really good at that. You get a job.
Susan says, Mark's exercise that demon. I don't want to, because it's not like I think these thoughts. I have to try. It's just I remember what it's like. I remember what it's like, and there's a logic to it. It's like, what happens if I let myself be afraid, stubborn, and hyper self-confident about my view of the world, like all at the same time, and then these kind of.
Right. And again, what's interesting about that, hey David, what's interesting about that, right, is that it preserves, and this is perfect for Fourth of July, right? It preserves that American exceptionalism, right?
Yes.
So it's not that, gee, we're having this dumpster fire pandemic situation because we don't know what we're doing and we're doing something bad, right? Which is what is actually the case. It's we're having this because of somebody else, right? Somebody else, the immigrant thing, the liberal, the libtard thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it preserves this sense that I'm good and right. I know what I'm doing. If it was just up to me, uh, everything would be great, and it's somebody else's fault. And so, preserving that American exceptionalism thing is really an important part of this.
Yeah.
I know, David, isn't he scary when he's channeling the conservative mind? I was kind of scared a little bit.
Well, you should be afraid. I mean, here's
Yeah.
the thing. Like, part of this for me is I have, in spite of myself, I have empathy, because really it's not the people that, like I was, people I grew up with, a lot of my family and friends, not many friends anymore, but uh, it's not like we hate everybody else and we want to be on top. Like, that's not the first thought. The first instinct is, look, this is what it means to do the right thing, and I'm going to do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, you get rewarded with a good life. And so if you don't get a good life, somebody must be messing it up for you. It's either that or you have to question everything. And so this is where you get this weird, this conflict. So people that I grew up with who were simultaneously xenophobic were also incredibly hospitable, even to people who were undocumented. Like, I would see this because systemically they needed to have a scapegoat, afraid, but in principle they weren't necessarily individually bad because they're being motivated by, I want to have the good life and I want to be protected from things that threaten it. And that's hard not to be sympathetic towards that. It's just twisted. And it's toxic ideology, abusive religion, all that stuff that comes together. And so, and it's based on fear. Like, fear is the button being pushed, and it's sad.
Yeah.
And it ends up causing suffering and death to other people. That's why oppression is so nasty, isn't because there's evil, sinister people twirling their mustaches trying to exploit people. It's not just that. It's just that you can mobilize millions of people based on their insecurities and fear to create a great buffer and base of support. It's terrifying.
Alan's good.
Scott writes, profits over people. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line for most politicians. Alan, you posted a link here. I'm not sure what it is, but it's from Democracy Now! So they have they got good stuff. So I'll leave that up for a second. So something about the counter-revolution of 1776. If you could share more about that, that'd be great, Alan. Patricia writes, blame goes to other. That's right. I mean, either that or you have to start as admitting that maybe you're wrong about your whole way of understanding things, which is hard for anybody to do.
Or even just being wrong, that it's okay to be wrong about anything. I mean, I do think that this is also connected, right? This is one of the kind of classic things of both whiteness and patriarchy, right? Is that you don't, and it's Trump's whole thing, right? You never admit you're wrong. and that is a very sort of core value of these kinds of systemic oppressions. And because as soon as you admit you're wrong, then you admit that somebody else could be right. There's a whole thing of egalitarianism and equality that starts to go in. You have to be willing to listen to somebody else. There's got to be space for greater conversation. And if you're the oppressor, like, there's none of that, right? The colonizer is never wrong, and so So to some extent, it's not even as extreme as the whole thing, my whole ideology falls apart. It really is that, even on a basic level, I can't even admit that I'm wrong about anything,
Yeah.
which of course is a totally horrendous, crippling way to live.
I mean, sometimes there'll be this, my heart's in the right place, but I made a mistake. So it's like that surface level wrong of like tactical wrongness. But to me, like in order to begin to see things more accurately, you have to start acknowledging perception, the wrongness of perception, that's the harder thing. And that's the thing where the colonizing mind can't ever say, oh, my perception is wrong. That's the one that takes extra humility, and one is unfortunately absolutely necessary for us to survive as a species at this point. Yay.
Yeah.
Susan writes, I shared a post yesterday from Bill Moyers. Gist of it was that Republicans don't want us to fear that which will require policy change, but an enemy that we can hate, immigrants, people of color. By the way, I have a very difficult time getting into the mindset of conservatives, so you're probably better off to have that ability. It's probably good.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, this having someone to blame thing is huge. I mean, it's David writes, there's a Deuteronomist. How do you say this word? Deuteronomistic theological view underpinning this. For those people who haven't studied the Hebrew scriptures or theology, maybe you could unpack that a little bit more. But there's kind of
I think that what David is getting at is a little bit of the, in-group, out-group kind of idea, which certainly is one theme running through the law and legalism. No question about that. It's not the only theme, but it is a very big theme that often gets lifted up for sure. Yeah, and again, this notion of the chosen people. So if one sees oneself as chosen by God, then you have a higher standing than anybody else, and that is ultimately very blinding when it turns out that you don't.
And this idea of there are blessed people and cursed people, and the blessed people are the ones who are abiding the law or the principles, the God-given principles for freedom, and the other people bring curses upon themselves. Yeah, that kind of thinking is
hashtag blessed, hashtag gratitude, hashtag every day is a blessing.
It's like that guy, this is old news now because it happened over a week ago, but remember that the minister who got in trouble, the evangelist who's like, well, instead of white privilege, we should call it white blessing. That was a great glimpse. Ellen writes, the maintenance of slavery was perhaps part of the inspiration for the split from Britain, who was about to abolish slavery. That's true, and that's a piece of our history that people don't really want to look into. That's not even just a conservative thing. Like if you could get a Democrat to admit that, it'd be mind blowing. I feel like I need to make this clear. Like just because it says Republicans unmasked doesn't mean somehow we're pro-Democrat here. It's just recognizing like, okay, the Republicans are pushing this particularly gross narrative about not wearing masks. But we could spend all day talking about failures of Democratic leadership too, in case anybody out there is seeing this saying, oh, they're being partisan. Like maybe a little bit, but mostly we're just choosing to dump on one group today more than another. CK writes, this feels like it's all about the economics of things. They had to get things back on track before it spiraled out of control to the point of no return. And now they realize they fucked up. So let's all put masks back on and hope for the best kind of thing. I do think there's like an, oh shit.
No, that's exactly what
it is. Worse than we thought, because I don't think they were like, oh, we don't care if people die. There's some of that, but they're thinking, we don't care if some people die. It'll all blow over. I think that's kind of more.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly what it is, CK. I mean and again, this is what the new spin is going to be: is that now masks will help us continue the economic boom and the economic freedom. No, I mean that was the push, and it was like, it's like playing a big game of chicken till the election, right? So November is the cliff. And they were kind of like, well, can we open up and get the economy good again? And it won't get too bad before the election. And then we win, right? I mean, that, and again, that's why I say that the issue here is to realize that these people do not have an ideology. They simply have a desire for power. And so, it was a big game of chicken and they've lost, right? And again, those of us that know anything about this thing knew that this was going to happen. And so, right. So now it's like, oh shit, can we reel it back in before the election happens? And they are understanding that, yeah, there's too many months between now and November, and we've got to do something.
Yep.
Yeah, Heather's got a great comment here.
Speaking of profits over people, little word shift. What if God did
nice
send
pun there, Heather?
Trump as judgment, thinking Jeremiah. I think there's something there about like I think we need to have a deeper theology of judgment, like how we understand that, instead of just kind of taking more of a classically, theologically liberal approach and dismissing it all, because I think there are cause and effect. Dan talks about karma a fair bit. I think there's some of that. At the same time, I'm really uncomfortable with language of divine judgment when it comes to, in this case, if Trump is a judgment, but we're seeing people of color and immigrants disproportionately affected, I'd want to be careful about how we slice and dice that, because if Trump is somehow a judgment of white America, there's a way of understanding that as like a participatory process rather than God's action as like this blueprint maker who's like, okay, now I'm going to punish them, which is what most people think when they hear judgment. So it's
I mean, you're absolutely right that having a deeper theology and reflection of judgment and what that looks like is really, really important. And and the sad thing is that in all of the stories about so-called divine judgment, I mean, those who suffer the most are always the poor and the dispossessed, and that's one of the sad realities about human ecosystems, right? Is that when things fall apart, the people who are hurt the most are the people who are most on the edge.
The people that the system has made most vulnerable are going to be affected the most when crisis happens.
And I mean, to me, I think there's no question that Trump is a symptom of a whole host of incredibly unhealthy attitudes, behaviors, all of that. And so in that sense, right, I mean, if divine judgment is seen more as a kind of karmic or law of nature kind of activity where, after a while, when negative effects and actions build up to a certain extent, something really bad happens, then, I mean, I think there's no question about that.
Well, to use another imagery, the imagery of fruit works really well here, because Trump is the fruit of America, like the American experiment. Like, this is where it goes. A society based on exploitation and enslavement that centers itself on free market economy and sees itself as the police of the world, you're going to end up with a fascist leader. That's just inevitable, unless you address those core sins or foundational myths of our society, which we have not done.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Susan writes, right, it's getting back to this narrative. It's not being spun as saving lives, but rather keeping the economy rolling along. Yuck.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, so for example, in South Carolina, and again, we talked some about how incompetent leadership is scarier than evil, intelligent leadership, the idea. So in South Carolina, the governor gets up there the other day and he says, he doesn't say we're wearing masks because we don't want people dying. He didn't say that. He got up and he said, we're wearing masks because if we don't, we won't have football this fall. Like, that was the reason. We want to be able to go to football games. And then his health, the head of the South Carolina Health Department gets up, and I mean, it's just, you do have to laugh, right? She gets up and she said, you know what? The virus can be spread simply by breathing. And that's why we need to wear masks. And I'm thinking to myself, 5 months into this is news. So yeah, I mean, I think part of this whole rolling along, and you mentioned the Habsburgs the other day, who, inbred themselves to the point where they were sort of these mutant leaders. I mean, we do have an unbelievable number of totally incompetent people in leadership, and leadership matters. And we're seeing that.
And again, that's inevitable. If the controlling force of your society is effectively an oligarchy, you're going to have easily manipulated leadership in the place of. They're gonna give us a bunch of dolts to choose from.
Right.
Yep. I don't care who you are. Like, with very few exceptions, Congress and senators are not the best and brightest of America. You get exceptions, like, and again, this is funny to me, like AOC is an example of someone who was part of an organizing force to bring someone from the people who had a lot of talent into politics. And so it's not a mistake that the vast picture painted of her by the establishment is that she's dumb, which is ridiculous, because she's clear to anyone who's intelligent and unbiased. She's clearly highly intelligent and principled. So intelligent, principled people are cast as being idiotic and out of touch. That's what
there you go.
But we're in a bad spot, and this is the thing. Part of the reason, though, my silver lining in all this is if you can have a president, even like who's as pig-headed as Trump, begin to shift narrative on masks, it shows that they're vulnerable too, that they are afraid of things, and that they rely on us to be manipulatable. And if we can't be manipulated, then they're screwed. So we have more power than we think we do. We just have to say, F this, we're not going along with it, you idiot. We're going to take charge of the situation.
All right, and we've got 2 great comments to close out on.
Dirk writes, I do believe there is a certain ideology, having heard about people's apparent need to watch football at all costs. Isn't it like, give me convenience or give me death?
I love that.
Again,
convenience
if your definition of the good life, like the life you're promised, that's the right life, includes football, then it's not cruel to say, I'm wearing my mask in order to watch football. It's like, this is how I gain access to the life that's promised me. Heather writes, we already wear social masks, so being asked to mask these masks is a threat.
Yeah, beautiful. Love that. All right. Well, happy 4th of July, everybody. Woo-hoo! And we'll see you on Monday.
Yep. Make sure not to blow off your fireworks too loudly, and because there's that conspiracy theory still out there. And also make sure that you honor America properly on this hallowed weekend. See you all on Monday.
Thanks for tuning in and all your comments. Bye.